Welcome! Thank you for joining us for today's lesson. This is part of a 13-lesson series brought to you by the Food Trust Nutrition Educators. The Food Trust works to ensure that everyone has access to affordable, nutritious food and the information to make healthy choices. In this series, we'll be covering topics such as how to shop at a farmer's market, stretching your food dollars, storing fruits and vegetables, and more. Join us every other week as we share nutrition information from MyPlate, as well as tips and tricks to eating more healthy food at every meal. Each bi-weekly lesson will be followed by a recipe featuring a seasonal ingredient you can find at your local farmer's market or grocery store. Meet our nutrition educators, who you'll get to know through our lessons or recipe demonstrations. We're excited to have you with us. Thanks again for joining us. Please fill out our anonymous survey at the end of this video so that we can find out more about who we're reaching and how to serve our audience best. We hope you come back for our next lesson. See you then!
Hello, my name is Charlene, and I'm a nutrition educator here with the Food Trust. A little bit about us: we work hard to make sure people have access to delicious, nutritious food no matter where they live. We also provide nutrition education by using MyPlate, which is the basis for every lesson that we teach. So here's just a little overview of the things you want to make sure that you know going forward as you watch our different lessons. For one, you'll notice that half of the plate contains fruits and vegetables. You want to keep this in mind for every single meal. Now, while it can be difficult to think for fruits for dinner and vegetables for breakfast, there are a lot of creative ways in which you can combine both of those to make something delicious as well as nutritious. As you watch our lessons, we'll give you some more ideas onto how to make that happen. Along with that, we're looking for 6 ounces of grains every single day. So that can be half of it whole grains and half of it are refined grains. Whole grains, for instance, are oatmeal, brown rice, quinoa, whole wheat bread. Those are great sources of a nice whole grain. Now, of course, we'll explain a little bit more as to why that's good for us, but you want to keep in mind, first things first, is that it's really great for our hearts. So when you are choosing your grains, you want to make half of your grains whole, meaning that 3 ounces of the day, you want to try to make sure you're getting a whole grain, and you'll find balance between the ones that you like and the refined grains that you prefer. Along with that, we're looking for 6 ounces of protein daily. With 6 ounces of protein, we want to make sure that we want to mix up how we get our protein. There are 2 types: animal-based protein and plant-based protein. With animal-based protein, it provides a great source of iron, which is super awesome for our bodies, but it doesn't provide any fiber. Versus plant-based protein, where the iron is a little bit harder to digest, but it provides us with fiber. That's when you want to make sure you're getting a nice balance of both. When you're choosing the size of meat, you want it to be the size of your palm of your hand. When you're choosing your plant-based protein, you want to at least get like a cup of beans, maybe even a 4th cup of nuts and seeds. Just make sure you're reading the labels and see what serving size is going to work for your protein goals. Last thing we have is dairy. With dairy, we want to make sure we're getting 3 cups of it daily. This is a great source of calcium. But if you don't eat dairy products for whatever reason, there are other options as well. There's non-dairy milk, there's kale, and other dark leafy green vegetables that count as a vegetable on my plate, but also counts as our calcium source as well. So you can kind of Get 2 different food groups covered with 1 vegetable. Along with that, there's even fortified orange juice as well as fortified bread that'll have calcium in it. So if you choose to eat dairy products, milk, cheese, and yogurt. If you choose to eat non-dairy milk, dark leafy green vegetables, and fortified products. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's lesson. We look forward to seeing you in the next one. Bye.
Hi, I'm Jen, and I'm a SNAP-Ed nutrition educator at the Food Trust. Today, I'm excited to be here to talk all about food safety, and we're also going to be making a delicious recipe with ingredients that you can find at your local farmer's market. At the end of the video, there is a link for a quick survey that will help us improve our programming. You can find a link on our website to the local farmers markets that are participating. What have you seen another person do while cooking that you would never do? Now think about the things that you do at home to keep your food safe and wholesome. We also have a handout that gives you some quick tips on how to keep your food safe, and we'll be talking about that. So let's talk about ways to keep our food safe. Number 1 is we want to make sure things are clean. That includes things like our hands, our surfaces, and also our food. So when we're washing our hands, we want to make sure we're washing them for at least 20 seconds with soap and some warm water. If you want to count to 20 seconds, that's awesome, but you can also sing happy birthday twice. Like we said, we also want to make sure our surfaces are sanitized before you start preparing any of your food. You want to avoid any lingering germs, bacteria that can also stay on your surfaces. The other thing you want to do is that you also want to keep the places that you're storing your food clean. That includes things like your fridges. Make sure you're cleaning your fridge out once a week at least so that you can replace the things that have gone bad and they don't spoil the other items that you have in there as well. Now the other thing you also want to do is that when you're preparing your food and you're using appliances like your toaster oven, your blenders, you want to make sure that you also sanitize them, especially things like the buttons and hard to reach places. The other thing you also want to remember to do is that right before you start cooking, you want to make sure you're rinsing your produce. You can wash your vegetables and fruits with some warm water and a little vegetable scrub to get rid of some of the germs, and we'll show you why. So like we said, it's really important to make sure that you're rinsing your fresh produce, and I'm going to talk about why. So here I have an orange in front of me. I went to the supermarket and I got it. But before it made it to its supermarket, it had a long journey. Before it made its way there, it had to be picked from the tree. It also had to be packed and then transported to the supermarket. So when we're thinking about who handled it, they're putting their hands over it, and we don't know where their hands have been. So think about this sauce as the germs that are on people's hands. So now we have this here. Now, once it's been at the supermarket, it's been unpacked and placed on the shelves by someone else. So it's been in other people's hands now as well. You also don't know if there are other people that are also going to be buying those fresh produce at the supermarket or at their farmers markets. So they might be touching them and then deciding not to take them home. And then I come in and then I'm looking at this orange and I don't see this sauce, this germs. I don't see them. So I might smell them and then I decide to take it home with me. So before it does that, I have to put it in my shopping cart and then put it on the conveyor belt where I'm going to pay for it. And then finally the cashier is also grabbing it. So once it makes its way home and I'm going to prepare it and say I forgot to wash it, this is kind of what is happening. You can't see it, but here you can see how the sauce is now making its way inside the orange. So we want to make sure that we're rinsing our produce with warm water, and you can use a vegetable scrub as well. We also want to make sure that when we're shopping, we're separating our items. Things like our raw meat, poultry, and fish should be separated in plastic bags away from our produce that isn't going to be cooked. When you're starting to cook, you also want to make sure that you're separating your items. Things like your cutting boards should be used for different items as well. The plastic cutting boards are good for preparing your raw meats on because the wooden ones tend to absorb the liquids. So these ones are better used for your fresh produce. Now, when you're cooking at home, you also want to make sure that you're cooking your raw meats, your pork, and your fish at the safe internal temperature required. So that'll be 145 degrees, and you can use thermometers to measure that temperature. If you're cooking with ground beef, pork, any ground meat, you want to make sure you're cooking it to 160 degrees. And now when you're cooking with your poultry, like your chicken and your turkey, make sure you're cooking it to 165 degrees. So after you prepared your food, you also want to make sure you keep them at a food safe temperature. That means that you want to keep your cold items at 40 degrees or less, and then your hot items, keep them at a temperature of 140 degrees or higher. So just keep in mind how easy it is for germs to spread, and make sure you're separating your food and also washing your produce. Do you think you might change any of your habits when you do your food prep? And now let's make our recipe. We're using some ingredients that you can find at your local farmer's market, and if not, at your supermarkets. And Wayne will be showing us how to prepare some ginger carrots.
Hello. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's lesson, all about food safety. We learned a lot of different things about food safety today. So let's recap and go over those things. We learned that there is a lot of things that we want to make sure we keep in mind even before we start to cook and store our food. So first things first, let's talk about coming home from the market. If you got fresh fruits and vegetables, you want to make sure that you are rinsing them off before you consume them. Even if they come with a skin, like an orange for instance. A lot of people have handled that orange before it's gotten to you. So you want to make sure that you are rinsing it off, and maybe even using a fruit and vegetable scrubber to really get off any extra debris that you don't want on your food. Along with that, we want to make sure that we are storing, if you bought meat for instance, in its proper place. If you don't plan to use that meat within a few days, throw it in a freezer. That way it stays nice and healthy for you, and that it doesn't go bad before you're able to use it. If you do store it in your fridge, you want to keep it on the bottom shelf. That way if there's any liquid coming out of it, that it doesn't drip down and contaminate every shelf afterwards if you put it on the top. So you want to make sure that you're putting it at the bottom shelf. Now let's talk about cooking. Before you start cooking, you want to make sure that your area is clean. You sanitized everything is out of the way, nothing's going to distract you when you are going to prepare your food. Now let's think about if you were making spaghetti for instance. You want to make sure that you're using different cutting boards for your fruits and vegetables, for your seafood items, and for your meat items. If you're using one cutting board for all of them, it's going to cross-contaminate, and you just don't want that. So if you're making spaghetti and you're adding fresh vegetables, that's one cutting board. Let's say that you are adding chicken versus beef or ground turkey. You want to make sure you're cutting up that chicken breast on another cutting board completely. Now, of course, we could talk about cooking. You want to make sure that when you're cooking your meat, you want it to reach a certain internal temperature. The internal temperatures are available through our lesson, and you can also see them online. You want to make sure that you're reaching those levels. That way you're killing off any type of bacteria or other organisms that can make you sick. After you finish cooking everything and you've served everyone, you want to make sure that you are, not storing your food in those metal pots and pans that you cooked in. You don't want to put that in the fridge because the metals will seep into your food, and overall you just don't want that. You want to make sure that you switch it over to a more appropriate container, and then wait for it to become room temperature before you put it in your fridge or freezer. If you put it in while it's still hot or even warm, it will reach a certain temperature that will breed bacteria and other toxins that will make your food inedible. You want to make sure that you're not wasting any food here by keeping it nice and safe and healthy. So thank you so much for attending today's lesson. We look forward to seeing you again in our next one. Bye.